and for making the time to listen and participate today. I'd like to bring up now our first speaker, Dr. Rachael Fleurence, who has recently taken the position as the director of Ness. She was a former MDIC member of the board of directors, which is where I first got to know Rachael, and joined MDIC previously from working with Corey, and she's uniquely positioned to help us lead the Ness effort. So please help me in welcoming Rachael to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. So as Bill said, this is my first presentation of the latest Ness slides. So as I've been on the job now for just under 3 months, things have been developing rapidly. So I'm going to test these slides on you, and you're going to tell me if they work or they don't work. But I'm delighted to be here this morning and to be presenting to you on the progress of the Ness Coordinating Center. This is our early branding effort for the new Ness logo. I guess I should probably, before I get into the meat of this, just say a few words about kind of the context around Ness. So Ness is not a new idea. It's really sort of grown out of the vision of a number of leaders in the ecosystem, and particularly Jeff Shuren at CDRH. And they've been working on sort of the promise of Ness and how to operationalize Ness for close to 7 years now. So I'm really sort of at the end of a long chain of people that have been putting a lot of thought into how to generate better evidence around medical devices. So kicked off with some white papers out of the FDA in around 2011, 2012. A large planning board was set up by the Brookings Institute, now the Duke Margolis Institute, to think about the issues that Ness had to grapple with. That board came out with some recommendations in 2015 and 2016, and one of them was to set up a governing board and an executive director to start actual implementation around Ness. So with that, I will go into some of the more the details of this. So Ness was set up to really deal with a problem, and I think when you start with a fairly new initiative, it's really important to agree on what problem we're trying to solve, because the risk with these initiatives is that you try to solve everything for everyone and then not very much gets done. So with that in mind, sort of trying to be explicit about the challenge that's trying to be resolved here, I thought was an important first step for audiences in all different categories of stakeholders, from the FDA to the medical device industry to patients to payers and other groups that are involved in this. I think one thing that makes this opportunity really important, and why I was excited about taking the job, is that all stakeholders right now are united around wanting to make patients' health outcomes and quality of life better. So that is sort of the uniting principle here that brings everyone to the table. And then, of course, each stakeholder has different goals and incentives and constraints that they work within, but that's sort of the uniting piece here, is really working towards improving patients' quality of life and health outcomes. With that in mind, the Nest is really being created to catalyze efforts to have access to better quality data in more real time and with less cost. And so if you look at these 3 factors, that's really sort of what Nest is trying to help convene and help support. There are a number of reasons why different stakeholders are at the table. For the FDA and the medical device industry, it's really about improving regulatory decision-making, both in timeliness and in quality and in sort of breadth of data that's available. There's a lot of opportunity here to provide faster access to technology to patients, but also ensure safety on the other side of the market approval with better access to data. There's potential for Ness to contribute to improved clinical decision-making, both for clinicians and for patients. There's potential for helping health systems with purchasing decisions and the quality of care of their patients. And there's opportunity to provide evidence for payers, both in the public and in the private sphere here. So again, the problem that we're trying to solve is really that access to low-cost, high-quality, and near real-time evidence. So this is a slide that I've borrowed from Jeff Shuren at the CDRH, and this is sort of how he's talked about the problems that we're trying to solve and where we might get to. Real-world evidence has this opportunity and this potential to really help us shift from the situation we're in now to a different, more nimble and agile system. So here are the 4 problems that we think about. The first one is passive surveillance. So many of you are aware of the sort of the current system for reporting issues with medical devices, and this idea that we could get to something called active surveillance, where there's much more automated ways to detect safety signals in medical devices, and that's technically becoming more and more possible with the availability of electronic health data, although, as you can imagine, there's a lot of governance issues around sort of use and access of data, and also, of course, patient privacy issues that need to be accounted for. The second one that's mentioned here is the challenges of finding the right pre- and post-market balance. So with the idea that if we did have much better safety and surveillance systems post-market, the decision-making pre-market could be streamlined. So really sort of helping with that, they call it the shift in decision-making. The third challenge mentioned here is called parallel track to clinical practice, and that's really referring to sort of the system that we're in now, where sort of high-quality research tends to be on a parallel infrastructure track, so very high cost to set up high-quality clinical trials, high-quality studies, generally involving a lot of parallel staffing to meet a number of requirements, particularly on the regulatory side. A number of us, and this is the kind of work I did at PCORI, sort of have this dream of being able to really capitalize on the data that's generated in the course of clinical care, or even whether with a doctor at home, to be able to conduct very high-quality research, but without setting up these parallel systems that are costly, inefficient, and burdensome. And so sort of related to that is that idea that there's a lot of inefficient one-off studies that get done to generate evidence, and our system is sort of poised with, given the availability of electronic health data and the interest of so many stakeholders in really making the change, it is poised to be able to make that kind of leap to a sort of a system that's much more nimble and be able to provide evidence at lower cost, near real time, and keeping the methodological standards that are needed. Having said that, the challenges are real, and so it's not necessarily an easy leap or transformation to make, but this is sort of where we'd like to see the system moving. So one of the questions I get is, in my first 2 months, is, well, that's all very nice, but what is Ness and what do you do? And what are the milestones? So, which is a very fair question, except that I don't have all the answers yet. So Ness has been a dream and a vision for transforming the system, but the actual implementation is really sort of what I got hired to do, working with a very senior governing committee that's multi-stakeholder, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. But really our job is to get from the vision to, well, what does that mean in practice and how? What is Ness going to be? How's it going to be organized? What are you going to offer to the ecosystem, and how are you going to work? That's not all been figured out yet, and that's kind of my job in the next 6 months. So you may, at the end of my presentation, still have the question, but what is Ness? And as I say, I don't have all the specific answers to that just yet. But some of the things that are emerging, I'm going to sort of talk to you just sort of, again, we're very early days, like what it's likely to be and what it's not likely to be. That'll be my next slide. But on this slide, it's to say that we are working, you know, with all the stakeholders in the system to figure out what Ness will be, what it will deliver, and what it can and cannot do. Ness is going to be, I think of Ness as a catalyst and a convener, so we're going to be working with the best groups in the ecosystem to make things happen. We're going to be establishing partnerships with a number of organizations, collaborations, companies that do this kind of work, but really sort of work around solving the particular problem in the medical device field. We're going to be much more in the business of setting standards and setting methodological standards, data quality standards, than actually doing the work ourselves. There's many places that do this work, that are set up to do this work, and particularly when you get into data issues, there's a lot of obviously compliance issues around both cybersecurity but also patient privacy. And so Ness is not going to be in the business of actually sort of having data internally, but our job is really going to be to sort of set the standards and be a convener for all these groups. And then finally, we, in order to survive, we're going to have to show value to the ecosystem, and we're going to have to show enough value that some of the stakeholders are going to be willing to keep us in business. And so that's also the job that's underway, is thinking about what's the business plan for Ness, how does it keep going after the initial seed funding that we're getting through FDA and the MDUFA 4 commitment letter. So these are just early guiding principles to help you think about what Ness is and what it's not. So Ness is going to be largely decentralized, modular, flexible. So we're really going to be working with all kinds of different groups in the ecosystem to make things happen, but we're not going to be deciding that there's one approach and everyone would follow that approach. We'll be a catalyst, we'll be a broker of solutions, and we'll be kind of setting standards with experts in the ecosystem. So we're not going to be a centrally organized kind of one-size-fits-all group. We're not going to actually be doing the actual work. So I'm not going to be hiring a number of programmers to do data queries across the system. There's lots of places that do that really well. We'll engage with them, but we'll be sort of more convening and sort of supporting that work than actually doing it. And we won't be implementing our own solutions. We'll really be choosing among the best solutions in the ecosystem to make things work and convene groups to do that. So this week was a big week for Ness, and in some ways it was its first big milestone. So we announced our governing committee last week, and we had our first face-to-face meeting Tuesday, 2 days ago. And these are the folks that sit on the governing committee and will be helping me develop the strategic and operational plan and the sort of what Ness is, what it will do, how it will be sustainable, what's it going to provide in terms of products and services. So I'll just point out in orange, we have 4 trade association nominees, and that was per the legislation, per the proposed MDUFA legislation, we need representatives from the 4 big trade associations in the medtech space. So these are the folks here. We have a combination of folks coming from health systems, academia, payers, both public and private. We also have 2 patient organizations represented. That was also in the MDUFA legislation that we needed 2 patient organizations represented, and we were lucky to get Mark Button from the National Health Council and Sharon Terry from Genetic Alliance, who both represent large umbrella patient organizations that will help us work with the patient communities and make sure that their voices are well represented on the work that Ness does. So this is our newly minted governing committee. I'll just say a few words for those of you who really do need a bit more detail about what Ness is and what it's going to do, and sort of want to sink your teeth into more specifics. This is a streamlined version of our proposed strategic objectives for the next 5 years. So I've been thinking about Ness work in 4 large groups of activities. So one is governance. So one is the identification of solutions. The next one is thinking about Ness functions, key functions, and sustainability plan. And then the 4th one is our communications and outreach. Governance is both simple and complex, so there's a lot of players involved in Nest, where actually the governing committee is actually a committee of the MDIC Board of Governors. The FDA is our current funder, so there's lots of kind of pieces of the puzzle that need to be organized appropriately so Nest can function efficiently. And so far, so good. It's been a pretty smooth ride given the number of stakeholders and groups involved. On the solutions discovery and implementation, Ness currently has a request for information out to a number of groups. Maybe some of you have received or seen that. So we're asking for the ecosystem to sort of flag their interest in being part of Ness and showing and letting us know what their capabilities are in terms of data use, data access, evidence generation, and many more activities. On the key functions and sustainability, we'll be starting a business plan and a sort of a work group that will be focused on thinking about how Ness needs to be organized, who it needs to hire, what products and services it will offer, how much it will cost to work with Ness, and all these kinds of items that feel very early on right now, but actually are pretty critical to start thinking about off the bat so that we don't go down roads that are going to turn out to not be sustainable roads for Nest. And then finally, communication and outreach. So that's really about establishing some brand recognition and starting to get the message out to different stakeholders groups with obviously the challenge that, as I said earlier, our message isn't very specific yet because we're really in the early days. So it's sort of that dance of wanting to be recognized as a brand name, but needing to be a little bit more specific about what we do and what we offer, which we're not quite there yet. So it's sort of I think we'll start tentatively, and then as Ness work progresses, we'll start exponentially communicating out to key groups. That's okay. So I thought I'd just say a few more specific words about, so what is Ness going to be doing in the next few months? This is a little bit in the weeds, but it's really just to say, and you don't need to read all the slides, but it's really to say I have 3 key activities right now. So there's a call for demonstration projects that just went out. So looking to identify projects that are already underway and that are really working in the sort of sweet spot of what Ness wants to be doing. So there's a number of pretty exciting projects underway that use electronic health data in the system, use the unique device identifier, there are projects using piloting active surveillance methods, so running programs on data sets to be able to identify safety signals without having to rely on the MDR. There's a number of really exciting patient-generated data pilots that are out there, and so I'm hoping to bring those folks that are interested to collaborate with Nest in the early days, sort of in the tent, and sort of starting to sort of see how we might leverage the work that they're doing. The second area will be a call for targeted projects. So there are obviously a number of gaps that will need a little bit of funding and some support and so there'll be a call for targeted projects going out probably late fall. And then the final activity that we're working on, which I've referred to earlier, is this request for information that's gone out pretty wide to a number of data and analytic solutions companies. And so these range from sort of the big players like the IBM Watsons to health systems that have curated EHR data and already have done work in the area. So I'm just interested to see who's going to come in sort of the larger ecosystem and who's interested in being part of these collaborations. And this is just my final slide that summarizes. So I'm 3 months in the job. Nest is older than me, thank goodness. But here are sort of some of our important milestones as of July 2017. So our governing committee up and running, had its first meeting, and then these calls that are out there and that we should be getting results for starting late summer, early fall. And so at your next meeting, I'll hopefully be able to report out on some of the learnings that we'll have had from these activities. So I think that's my last slide. Yes, so with that, thank you for your attention, and I can probably take a few questions if there are any.
I'll ask some questions. Thanks for the presentation, the introduction to Ness. We appreciate it. How do you see the data that we collect currently at a manufacturing firm, type data, reporting type data? Thank you. How do you see the data that we currently collect in a manufacturing firm via complaints and medical device reporting, et cetera, feeding into or becoming, working side by side with the type of work that you're going to collect in Nest?
So I don't have a specific answer to that. I think it's an important and interesting question. I think the way I understand it is we're going to be piloting different approaches. So we're not going to flip from the current system to a new system overnight, obviously, and we're going to have a lot of kind of proof of concept and testing and scaling and comfort that the systems can sort of, so that a newer system can slowly emerge. I think there's going to be a lot of piloting and testing and validation, and obviously the data that the manufacturers collect is going to be an important part of establishing the proof of concept and doing validation work. So there'll be important roles, I think, on all sides to play, but I don't have more specifics than that at this point.
Rachel, could you paint a picture for us of some examples, some potential examples of who might be the customers who ultimately come to Nest and what kinds of things they might be asking you to do, or what kind of questions or data they'd be trying to engage Nest in collecting?
Yeah, so again, this is very early days, and I think it needs more kind of thinking in detail than it's being given. But I do see right now sort of the three key stakeholders sort of between the FDA, the medical device industry, and the health systems that own the data. And you could add patients there in terms of the fact that there's a lot of kind of movement and push right now to see if patient-owned EHR data or patient-generated data through other means could also be played. But let's call that group the data holders. So these three parties, I think, are really key to the sort of the setup of Nest. How and who pays for playing in Nest, I think that really needs kind of more thought. Right now, what I'm seeing is just sort of the convening and the catalyst role for Nest, the standard setting role. So not everything that's out there is going to be certainly of regulatory grade quality. And we just talked about surveillance. I mean, there's going to be a lot of testing and validation that goes before we transform the system. But I see, I mean, there's different kind of models that could happen. There could be a membership model for Nest. There could be an accreditation model sort of for places that could get an accreditation for meeting certain standards that Nest will set. So I think there's all kinds of different sort of business models in terms of how the financials would flow, but it's not being worked out at this point. Yeah, I mean, one of the risks is that, I mean, there's no question that Nest could be set up to provide value as a whole to the ecosystem, but that doesn't necessarily translate into someone writing checks to Nest. So I think we're going to have to figure out, I mean, I think I sort of refer to it as products and services. What actually is Nest going to offer? You know, with the understanding that the data, I mean, the data will be sort of behind the firewalls of the health systems or the medical device companies, and what we're going to be doing is a lot of sort of governance and working with folks to figure out how actual studies will be conducted and what the sort of the governance, the data use agreements will be, all these kinds of things, and out of that also figure out how Nest can sort of survive financially. So these are all the problems that are on the table to resolve.
So one of the questions that I was wondering when I first had heard about this concept multiple years ago is how do you get people to participate such that they're actually entering this data? As you mentioned earlier, with clinical trials, there's people that specifically, participate in the study to ensure that the data is being entered and all of that. Will it be tied to Medicare or something like that? In order to get reimbursement, now you're having to enter data into the database. Will it be for specific product types, or is it intended to try to be just all-inclusive?
No, great question. So, so one thing I think I'm pretty safe in saying is that there won't be sort of data entered specifically for Ness. So the data, the dream is really to be able to capitalize on EHR, billing, claims data, but these have data owners, and including patient data. These are all already sort of owned, and they'll stay behind whatever institutional firewalls they need to stay behind. And the key with Ness is how we set up agreements with these groups to be able to use the data in a way that's appropriate and relevant for the studies at hand. And that's different from setting up a separate, sort of a full-blown traditional clinical trial with a one-off infrastructure. So I think the first thing is there's not going to be a request for people to enter data anywhere that's specific for Ness. We're really going to have to capitalize on what's out there and figure out the links and the relationships there. With the coverage, the CMS coverage question, so we certainly have someone from CMS sitting on our governing committee, but I certainly wouldn't, Ness I don't think will have any sort of say or control over coverage decisions. What Ness can do is help provide better information both on the effectiveness side and the economic side, but what CMS decides to do with that I think won't be under Ness, well, I know won't be under Ness' remit. So, I come from a world where I work with a lot of academic medical systems that were really doing quite advanced in how they curated their EHR data, sort of making it ready for research. So that's the world I come from, and I know they're pretty advanced in sort of some of the work that they can do, and so hopefully we'll capitalize on that. But they're not the only players in town. There's a lot of other folks, and there's a lot of advances, as a lot of you know, in the big data realm. So these folks, I think, also have a lot to contribute to the conversation. But they don't own data, so you have to get the analytic solutions working with the people that actually have the data.
Yeah, Rachel, just to add on what you said here, a couple things. In the original MDUFA commitment letter and the concept, the goals around and the demonstration projects will be looking at, approvals for PMA and clearances for 510Ks, and value created by being more efficient and effective in terms of on the innovation side. So that's part of the equation. And then the other part you mentioned with MDRs is on the active surveillance side, if Ness is able to show efficiency and effectiveness in surveillance that improves patient outcomes, lowers concerns of risk, but is also more cost effective because the manufacturers will all tell you that the existing system, besides being ineffective, is extremely costly. So there's value that can be extracted if the outcomes that are envisioned for Ness are realized, then I think there will be opportunities that, from that value perspective. So then we'll end up, I think, with people being willing to fund this, but that's obviously yet to be proven.
So just building on what you said with regard to how this is all going to work, what you're really doing, I'm just kind of validating my thinking here around this and getting an understanding, is equipping, facilitating and encouraging kind of the ecosystem of data so that we out here, I'm in medical device industry, one of the stakeholders can capitalize on those equipping systems. I mean, some are ahead of others. Develop a protocol for collecting certain information in certain categories. What you also might do, though, is have particular study areas where conveners will come and kind of facilitate that kind of gathering. I'm just trying to understand this. And really just be a warehouse, not a warehouse of data, but a sort of I see the internal spoke of the wheels, where we out here get these equipping tools, are able to use them, and then really facilitate that real world evidence, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to explain it. So we're sort of really, I use the word accreditation. I think that's down the road, but it's sort of bringing in the players where we'll be able to look at the quality of data that they have. We'll be able to look at the methodology and be able to sort of give a seal of approval to say these are groups that that are able to do this work, and then be a sort of, some people have used the word dating service, but sort of a convener for
not speed dating,
to get together.
Just dating.
And then remembering that, I mean, I think a very important part of this and why I think Ness can be successful is we have the FDA involved and really excited about the opportunity as well. And so we'll all be learning at the same time about what constitutes quality in the data that what are the standards around the data? What are the standards around the methods used? And that process of sort of having everyone working at it together, I think, is what makes Ness maybe different and a different opportunity than if this was being done by any of the two groups sort of separately of the three. The other thing, and because I didn't quite answer your question about are we going to be on specific devices or areas, and I think so I think the answer is sort of yes and no. So it's quite clear that we'll have pilots with sort of early adopters and people that are willing to kind of roll up their sleeves and give things a try. The goal, of course, is then for learnings to be scalable and generalizable to other areas, but certainly given that Nest is very early on, not a lot of staff, so we don't have a lot of kind of resources in terms of staffing and infrastructure, that will start small and then grow out of successes, and then eventually be more and more inclusive of all the different types of devices and manufacturers and problems that might need to be resolved. But I think starting small and capitalizing will be the approach.
Hi, Rachael. So I don't think you've talked much about registries, and so maybe you'd like to talk about the role of medical device registries and the fact that a lot of industry is already collecting a lot of data in registries, and how that will work.
Yeah, so no, that's a great question. So in part, I don't talk a lot about registries because I don't know a lot yet about registries, so I'm certainly on the learning curve. So in some ways, some of the registries have been at the cutting edge of using real-world evidence, and right now a lot of the real-world evidence decisions that are happening at the FDA are using the established and well-known registries. And so part of my job is to get to know the registries better and sort of see how they fit in, and I hope a number of them will actually respond to the RFI that's out there. What I will say, though, is the traditional registry model is not scalable across the ecosystem, so there needs to be thought, even among the established registries, about how they might adapt to some of the changes that are occurring. The way I'm thinking about it is sort of how, there's a lot of heterogeneity in registries as well, right? So there's some very small registries that are very they actually don't have all the data that's needed either. So I think it's important to sort of think about the registries as there's all kinds of different offerings in the registry space that are not all the same. So, but the idea that that we all would be able to better use the data generated in the course of care or at home without the additional staff involved at the registry level to do all the collection, I think is something that we all need to be thinking about and moving towards. So that's why I hope that answers your question.
Hi. One of the challenges that we see very often when you're working with an ecosystem is the fact that each of the constituents has differing and sometimes conflicting incentives. So, manufacturers want to sell more devices, payers want to pay as little as possible, patients want to, have better outcomes and so on. Have you thought about how you plan to align those incentives and those goals so that ultimately we end up with the goal of improving patient outcomes?
Well, I'm laughing because I think it's both the challenge, but it's also what's exciting about something like this is that when you get the caliber of the people on the governing committee that want to work at this, then you know that there's something kind of exciting that could have, there's potential here for things to happen. I don't have a problem with everyone coming with the different kind of what I call the secondary kind of incentives or values or constraints. I think that's just the nature of the beast. Actually having everyone around the table is a huge step of being able to start the discussion and the sort of wrestling with issues. So my goal is not to have everyone aligned coming out of 3 years of Ness governing committee meetings. That's not a realistic goal. But having people figure out ways to make things happen given the constraints that they're coming from, that is a realistic goal. And again, the goal around, I think everyone at the table agrees that we're all really working in our different ways to improve patients' quality of life and health outcomes, and that's, as a starting point, that's an important one, and I think that gives us enough to get some things moving, get some things done, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
So Rachel, just actually maybe a twofold question, one for you and then maybe one for the rest of the industry audience here. First one is, I think Bill had mentioned ahead of time that there may be some alignment with the work our analytics group is doing and kind of the work that Ness is looking to achieve and enable. They're working on really what are some methodologies that can apply to the analysis, right? How is it that we make this now visible? How do we make that product performance something that's easily visually seen so that people can make comparisons around that effort? And I guess the role of matchmaking that Nest is going to play, do you envision them being a mechanism for, connecting whoever's doing that visualization to the data? Or, because I guess maybe I thought there was going to be more of that centralization in some way, shape, or form, or would that be the other way of interacting? I guess that's just general thoughts on, I know it's early in the process, but then for the manufacturers, I think Luann had mentioned, manufacturers, you've got a lot of rich data that might actually feed or maybe supplement or maybe add value to that. What's the comfort level in sharing that across the board, and what would it take to make it probably a little bit more comfortable? Well, split. First one.
Well, again, it's early days, so I don't want to speak as if we had everything figured out in terms of how this is going to work. But I do see Ness sort of as an important sort of convener and catalyst and sort of setting standards, but with input from all the different parties. And I also believe in the early adopters model, so not everyone is going to come in and play ball immediately, but if we just get a few from the right places that are sort of able to show, demonstrate some success, then we'll have sort of the snowball effect, which is sort of how I think this could work.
I'll just add a couple things briefly there. Cisco, one of the, I think, core tenets when Ness was set up is we recognize that we need to do demonstration projects because we don't have all the answers. And there are a lot of questions that will come up that will ultimately result in mid-course corrections as we learn and discover and evolve. So I think part of the process right now is to see what comes forward in terms of demonstration projects and ideas and what's out there, because there's what we do know is we don't know everything that's ongoing right now, and all the data is very siloed, so the process that Rachel's identified will actually, I think, be quite informative just in terms of where are all the data sources that could be leveraged, and then how could they be leveraged. And so this is the beginning of a journey, and so as we get further down that path, I think some of these questions will become more clear. but at this point in time, we don't want to kind of pre-declare the solution. We want to allow for, you know, the innovation and the demonstration projects to kind of work through that process.
So Cisco, contrary to what I may have told you in previous times, the manufacturers don't have all the data. In fact, no one has all the data. No one body has all the data. That's why Ness is so important to convene all the bodies that have the data. For instance, we know how our devices work. We know that very well. We know how many we made. We know what the impact. We know what the risks are. But we don't know what happens to the patient 3 months down after the device is implanted or used. But the hospitals will know that. The providers will know that. The payers will know that because they have the follow-on payments for the medical treatment. So pulling it all together is actually the biggest benefit. And yeah, you talked about the firewalls that the device companies have, that the payers have, the providers have. It'll be interesting. There will be challenges, but we have to start doing it in order to achieve everyone's goal of better patient outcomes.
So I've been debating whether to add anything to either Rachael or Bill's comments. I'm Kathy Blake, and I'm with the American Medical Association, and I'm thrilled, and the AMA is thrilled to be represented on Nest and to be able to present the clinician perspective. And what I shared with the governing committee when we met the other day, and Rachael has so beautifully characterized the spirit in the room, which is that I think there is no one in the room who isn't thinking about patients first. And maybe that's the joy that comes with an inaugural governing committee. And maybe 10 years, 20 years from now, it will be very entrenched. But I can absolutely confirm that there is a willingness to roll up sleeves. This is not a feather in anybody's cap. Rachael's going to be pushing us, I think, often and hard. But I want to talk about, like, why would the AMA be involved in this? And why would we want so much for it to succeed? And fundamentally, it is about patients. We want that when we are sitting down, and I'm an implanting physician, when we are sitting down with a patient and with their family, that we're able to have as much information as possible to give them an opportunity to make a well-informed decision. And I'm a cardiologist. It is so hard to then later find out that there was information out there that might have informed a decision differently. But it's equally hard to read about the use of medical devices in other countries before in the United States, and for my patients to not have access to that, or to have 1 or 2 sites in the U.S. that have finally started implanting, you know, the biventricular defibrillator that saved my patient's life from heart failure, things like that. So the motivation for us as physicians is absolutely clear-cut. So again, I think we're very fortunate to have Rachael in the role that she's in, and really I would say everyone welcomes the input from this group and from others.
All right. Well,
good.